Welcome to another video of Server Administering series. In this video, we're going to discuss how to create and link group policy objects within Active Directory. In order to do this, you need to launch the Group Policy Management console. Within Server Manager, go up to Tools, and then select Group Policy Management. We need to expand Forest, dev.com, and then expand the domain itself. We are in the dev.com domain. Please remember that group policy settings are applied in a very specific order. First of all, any sites you may have configured and applied a group policy object to will be processed first. As you can see, in this domain, I have not set up any sites. But if I had, and I had applied a group policy object to that site, it would be processed first, and the settings I configured would affect all of the users and computers at a particular site. Next, any policies that are linked to the domain itself will be processed. Remember that group policy uses the concept of inheritance, meaning that if I link a group policy object way up here, at the domain level, it is going to be inherited by all the users and computers in the various organizational units within the domain. For example, here we have the US container. Within US, I have the sales container. Then I have 4 subcontainers here for computers, sales groups, and users. We have a domain policy, the default domain policy, that is linked to the domain. It's going to be inherited by all the users in India, US, research, sales, computers, sales groups, sales admins, users, and on down the tree of organizational units. Next, if we have any group policy objects linked to an organizational unit, those will be processed. These will affect all the users and computers within that organizational unit. Here's the thing that you have to remember about group policy processing. Any policies applied later will override policies that were applied earlier. Therefore, if I have a policy applied up here, in my default domain policy, and then I create another group policy object that is linked, say, to the US container, if there are any settings that conflict between the US group policy object and our default domain policy object, this one is going to win out because, remember, the OU group policy objects are processed after the default domain policy. Here's a general rule of thumb to keep in mind. Try to create as few group policy objects as you can because creating lots of group policy objects increases the amount of time needed to process all of them. The best practice is to create and apply your most general policies way up here, at the domain level. These are the settings that almost all users will have in common. Then, if you have exceptions for specific organizational units, you can come down and put those lower in the domain tree. That's a much better way of doing things than coming through and making customized group policy objects for each one of these containers individually because things get messy really fast. With that in mind, let's take a look at our default domain policy up here. It's created by default when the domain is initially installed, and it contains a set of general settings that, as we said earlier, apply to all the users and computers in all of these containers. In addition, we also have the default domain controllers policy. It's also created by default when Active Directory is initially installed. Notice here that because it is applied to the domain controllers OU, its scope is limited to just this organizational unit, which, by default, contains just our domain controllers in the domain, not our member computers, not our users, but just our domain controllers. With that in mind, what we want to do next is create a new group policy object. We want to create it for an organizational unit, specifically, our sales organizational unit. Let's suppose that we've defined a security policy for our organization that says we're concerned that sensitive company data could be stolen by nefarious, malicious inside users who are bringing USB drives, plugging them into their computers, and copying off sensitive company data. So we want to set up a group policy object with a policy in place that will block the use of external USB drives. I'm going to right-click on Sales, and I'm going to select Create a GPO in this domain and link it here. Let's give it a name. Let's call it Block USB Devices. We have the option to select a starter GPO if we want to. We're not going to worry about that today. Notice, when I do that I now have a new group policy object created right here, and it is linked to sales. When I say linked, that is very important because it is actually linked to sales. The actual group policy object itself does not reside within sales. It is down here, under Group Policy Objects. Notice that it is right here, Block USB Devices. Notice the little icon right here that tells you this is just a link to another object somewhere else in the domain. If I right-click on this object and then click on Edit, then I am editing this actual Group Policy object over here, under Group Policy Objects. But if I were to delete this link, then it would actually only delete the link to the Group Policy object, not the Group Policy object itself. The real object still resides here, under Group Policy Objects. It just isn't enforced anymore because it is not linked to anything. With that in mind, let's go ahead and maximize our Group Policy Management Editor. Let's set up the policy that we talked about earlier, where we basically deny users the ability to connect external USB devices to their computer system. This is found under User Configuration under Policies. We want to go to Administrative Templates. Then we want to expand System. Under System, there is a category called Removable Storage Access. The policy we want is this one: all removable storage classes, deny all access. Let's double-click on this policy. By the way, when you have one of these policies open and you're not sure exactly what it does, how it is supposed to work, or how it is supposed to be configured, look over here, in the Help field. A lot of system administrators just blow by this, but it is full of very useful information. If we want to know what exactly this policy does if we enable it, it tells us right down here. If you enable this policy setting, no access is allowed to any removable storage device class. As you can see over here, there are actually many different policy settings you can configure for different types of removable storage devices, such as tape drives, removable disks, floppy drives, CDs and DVDs, and so on. If we turn this policy on by enabling it, that blocks access to all removable storage devices, and that's what we want to do here. At this point, we have configured this particular group policy object and linked it to the sales organizational unit, which then means it is going to be applied to all the users in sales and also, through inheritance, to all users in computers, sales groups and users. Let's suppose that we want this policy enforced for all of these users that we talked about except for our users in here, who are administrators. We want them to be able to have access to USB devices because they need it to do their day-to-day work. Our other users, however, we do not want them to have that level of access. Well, what do we do at this point? One option is to create a new group policy object lower down on the admin's container that does allow USB drives to be used. Let's create and link a new GPO. Let's call it Allow USB Devices. Click OK. Let's edit this policy. We'll go to the same place we were at before, under User Configuration Policy, Administrative Templates System Removable Storage Access. We'll bring up the same policy, but this time, we're going to set it to a status of disabled. Note here that it says if you disable or do not configure this policy setting, then write and read accesses are allowed to all removable storage device classes. Click OK. We'll close our group policy editor. Let's go to the admin's container. Let's go to Group Policy Inheritance over here. Here we can see a list of all the policies that are going to be inherited by this OU and the processing order based upon the order we talked about at the beginning of this demonstration. First, the default domain policy is going to be processed because it is linked to the domain itself. Then the Block USB Devices policy will be applied because it is linked higher up in the tree, to the sales container. Finally, the Allow USB Devices policy will be applied. Because this policy runs after this one and the same setting is configured in both of these policies, but to a different value, this one is going to win out because it gets processed last. Remember, when you're looking at this tab, that the policy with the lowest number over here, in the precedence column, has the highest priority. That's it for this video. In this video, we talked about how to create and link group policy objects within Active Directory. Thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe to my channel.